Hello one, hello all. Welcome to the Suitors of the Domino Lady podcast, the first and only podcast dedicated exclusively to the avenging adventuress of the pulps, the Domino Lady. I'm your host, Sam Oatley, and today's episode is going to be a unique one. We are not reviewing or dissecting a Domino Lady story, but instead providing a preparation episode to help ready you for a recently released Domino Lady story. That story is Paladins, The Blue Death, written by Bobby Nash and published by Moonstone Books, who have released multiple Domino Lady stories over the last 16 years. This story, like many of Moonstone's releases, is a crossover story, with the Domino Lady teaming up with multiple pulp heroes to fight a menace threatening the world. And today we will be going over the original stories featuring these pulp heroes and recommending the stories you need to read in order to be prepared for Paladins. Indeed, the reading I needed to do to make this primer is part of the reason I haven't released this episode until now. While Paladins released back in June of this year, I hadn't finished reading the characters' original stories until recently. It also meant that I haven't read Paladins fully, as I wanted to be familiar with all of the characters before I dived in. I did have a thread on Twitter that listed out all the required stories that I would direct people to, but unfortunately some of it was deleted by some sort of hiccup on Twitter's part. So making this episode is necessary in order to have a permanent record, but also because it allows me to have a more in-depth discussion about the pulp heroes featured within Paladins. Now, some of you might be wondering why Paladins is receiving so much attention and build-up from me. The reason is because this story is actually very important to the Domino Lady's current history. Moonstone Books is arguably the most important publisher of Domino Lady material, as it was their dual releases of the Domino Lady Sex as a Weapon short story collection and the 5-issue Domino Lady comic book series, both released in 2009, that arguably made her a viable character for new pulp writers. Bold Venture Press may have reintroduced the Domino Lady to modern audiences with the reprinting of her original 1930s stories, but Moonstone's releases jump-started a push for new Domino Lady material that has guided the character's trajectory ever since. However, this rush of new stories has significantly slowed down over the last few years. Around 2020-2021, Moonstone didn't push their pulp characters as much, and mostly spent the last few years relegating them to their short-form pulp magazines Double Shot and Triple Threat. While the Domino Lady featured in 3 of these issues, these were her only released stories from Moonstone for the last 3 years. Paladins is thus her first major release in a while, and could be the stepping stone to getting her back in the limelight. Indeed, in an interview with Sean Taylor, Paladins writer Bobby Nash stated that he actually had to push to feature the Domino Lady in this story, as the original story concept did not feature her at all. As such, Paladins could be an important step in the Domino Lady regaining her waning popularity. Another reason Paladins is important is because of Bobby Nash himself. Has been one of the most consistent stewards for the character, writing stories and comics for her since 2009. He has also been the main figurehead guiding the Moonstone iteration of the Domino Lady, writing many of her comics and stories for the company. He was actually the one who did the Domino Lady stories in Double Shot and Triple Threat. Nash is undoubtedly devoted to the Domino Lady, which is shown not only by his long time writing her, but also his aforementioned push to get her involved in Paladins when she wasn't originally featured. He could have easily have left the Domino Lady out of this story, but he didn't, and I think that is admirable from a creativity standpoint. As I've mentioned in the last episode, Nash is also writing several new comic books for the Domino Lady that will release in the near future, so I'm quite enthusiastic that she might get a second wind from Nash's efforts. So with all that being said, we need to answer the central point of this video. Who are the pulp heroes and heroines featured in Paladins: The Blue Death? They are the following characters: Domino Lady, Ravenwood, stepson of Mystery, Ki-Gor the Jungle Lord, his mate Helene Vaughn, Nela Qui, and the Night Marcher. Aside from the Night Marcher, who is an original character made for Paladins, all these heroes and heroines have featured in other stories before their inclusion in Paladins. Most of them came from decades-old pulp stories published in the 1930s, with only Nela Qui being a recently created character in 2015. But even she has only appeared in 4 stories and only within Moonstone publications. As such, I felt readers needed to know where to look to read about these characters, in order to understand their personalities and backstories. My hope is that not only will these recommendations familiarize you with these characters, but also might give you new characters to enjoy. I am going to include links to all of the recommended books in the description below, featuring both their respective publishers' websites and the book's Amazon pages. That way you will know where to access them and not have to do a lot of searching. We will start with the necessary Domino Lady stories, given she is the main focus of this podcast, and I want to give newcomers to the character a good starting point. If you are a newcomer, I would recommend watching our first episode to get to know the character and her general publishing history. But for this episode, the first Domino Lady collection I'd recommend is Compliments of the Domino Lady, released by Boldventure Press. This was the first major release of the Domino Lady's original pulp stories, and I maintain it is still the best. There are other collections with the Domino Lady's original stories, but as those who have watched our second episode know, they don't really hold a candle to Boldventure Press's edition. The paperback version of the book has all 6 of her original stories, but if you can, try getting the hardcover edition. This features a short story by legendary illustrator Jim Steranko, who also did art for the collection, and both the art and the short story are great. The short story, titled Arouse the Domino Lady, is an origin story for the Domino Lady, as the original stories did not feature an origin story for the character. It has some notable narrative and tonal deviations from the original stories, but it is a solid tale nevertheless. Once you read her original stories and Arouse the Domino Lady, I then recommend you read the first 2 releases Moonstone did with the Domino Lady in 2009, Domino Lady: Sex as a Weapon, and the 2009 Domino Lady comic book series. Sex as a Weapon was the first major collection of new short stories featuring the Domino Lady, and was a major guidepost for how both Moonstone and other publishers would approach the character. Many of the stories are crossovers with other characters like the Black Bat, the Phantom, and even Sherlock Holmes. But there are many self-contained stories featuring just the Domino Lady herself as well. The 2009 comic book series, simply titled Domino Lady, was written by Nancy Holder and illustrated by multiple artists. Though it only ran for 5 issues, it was very important in jump-starting the Domino Lady's comic book career within Moonstone. Each issue features 2 different stories featuring the Domino Lady, with some stories being 2 parts spread across 2 different issues. You can get the series 3 ways: buying each individual issue, buying the softcover Blonde Bombshell collection that has all 5 comics along with a few extra comics and text stories, or the hardcover Blonde Ambition collection that has the same contents as Blonde Bombshell. While I would normally recommend the Blonde Ambition edition due to its better paper and presentation, it is an absurdly hard edition to find. Many online retailers mistakenly labeled the Blonde Bombshell collection as Blonde Ambition, and I got the wrong editions multiple times during my hunt for Blonde Ambition. Blonde Ambition is also horrendously pricey, with the cheapest edition I could find going for about $200. Thus, while I like Blonde Ambition more, I would recommend getting Blonde Bombshell instead, as it is much easier to find and far cheaper, around $20 to $25 from most retailers. You can buy the individual comics as well, but both Bombshell and Ambition have some extra content that make them worth getting. We'll now move on to the other characters featured in Paladins, and I will give some brief descriptions about them as characters before telling you where to get their stories. The first one up is Ravenwood, Stepson of Mystery. Ravenwood is a private investigator in Los Angeles who often takes up strange and macabre cases that seemingly involve sinister magic. However, Ravenwood is no ordinary PI. He is an occult detective who has studied the mystical art of yoga in India and gained a limited sixth sense that allows him to detect danger. He also gets aid from his stepfather, the Nameless One, an Indian mystic who adopted Ravenwood as a boy when his parents died in an epidemic. The Nameless One is hinted to be centuries old and possesses the power of clairvoyance, to see both the past and the possible future. The Nameless One's mysterious nature is how Ravenwood earned the title of Stepson of Mystery, and the two of them work together to thwart evil that pops up in Los Angeles. Ravenwood was written by pulp writer Frederick C. Davis, and all 5 of Ravenwood's original stories appeared in 1936 as backup tales in the Secret Agent X pulp magazine, a backup story were stories put behind the main feature of a magazine. In this case, Ravenwood's stories were backups to the pulp hero Secret Agent X. Out of all the pulp characters featured in Paladins, Ravenwood is my least favorite, just because all his stories have a gimmick that gets a bit old once you catch on to them. I can't spoil the gimmick as they involve the reveals of the villains, but you will know them when you see them if you read these stories. However, I've heard others say they enjoy him, so I'll let your own taste guide whether you enjoy his stories or not. Ravenwood's original 5 stories are collected in the Ravenwood Stepson of Mystery collection, released by Ki-Gor Press. There is a short introduction by Will Murray that talks about Frederick Davis and the influence Ravenwood had on fellow pulp characters and future comic book characters, especially Doctor Strange. While I'm not the biggest fan of Ravenwood, I do think Davis does a good job with the creepy atmosphere and the macabre nature of the various cases. The 2 standout stories in the collection for me are Crucibles of the Damned and The Phantom Juggernaut. The former story deals with Ravenwood's investigation into a graveyard and the homes surrounding it, as grave robbery and torture are used to gain control of a vast fortune. The Phantom Juggernaut deals with a driverless car that is chasing people down Mulholland Drive and running them over or forcing them into deadly accidents. This story is very reminiscent of the Steven Spielberg film Duel, as well as a host of other killer car movies. Both are worth reading if you want to see Ravenwood stories at their most grim and mysterious. Ravenwood also appeared in a Moonstone books collection called Gentlemen Prefer Domino Lady, teaming up with the Domino Lady in a short story called Blind Date. I don't know if this story will be referenced in Paladins, but I wanted to mention it here just in case it is. You can also check out more Ravenwood stories from Airship 27, who have done several volumes with the character. The next 2 characters I want to cover are Ki-Gor and Helene Vaughn. Ki-Gor is one of the many Tarzan knockoffs that popped up in the pulp era, attempting to emulate the Jungle Lord success after the Johnny Weissmuller Tarzan movies had taken off at the cinemas. However, unlike many of the Tarzan copycats that came and went with just a handful of stories to their name, Ki-Gor managed to get 58 individual stories in the Jungle Stories pulp magazine from 1938 to 1954. There are 59 issues listed, but one of the stories was used twice in 2 different issues. Ki-Gor was the son of an English missionary that was in Africa for missionary work. only for his father to be killed by natives and Ki-Gor abducted into slavery. Ki-Gor escaped and lived in the jungle ever since, honing his body and survival skills to eke out a living in Africa. He also befriends an escaped circus elephant named Marmo, who helps Ki-Gor travel and fight. However, one day a rich aviatrix named Helene Vaughn crashes her plane near Ki-Gor, who saves her from a hungry panther and guides her back to civilization. During their journey, Helene falls in love with Ki-Gor, and Ki-Gor likewise falls in love with her. They soon marry and decide to stay in the jungle, rejecting the life of civilization as the world descends into chaos during World War II. I was actually surprised by how much I enjoyed these stories, as while they are derivative of Tarzan, they are breezy and exciting, with a genuinely sweet relationship between Ki-Gor and Helene. I also really like Helene Vaughn's character arc over the first few stories, going from a spoiled rich girl to a powerful jungle warrior in her own right. I actually think she's more interesting a character than Ki-Gor, who just kind of goes through the typical tension between civilized life and savagery that all Tarzan types go through. Helene is often stereotyped as a damsel in distress due to her penchant for being captured, but Helene actually is clever enough to find out ways to break loose herself, and there are times where Ki-Gor is the one captured and Helene has to save him. Ki-Gor and Helene's first couple of stories are collected by Steger Books in their Ki-Gor, the Complete Series collection. Sadly, Steger has been really sluggish in their release schedule with these collections, sometimes going up to 5 years between releases. As such, they are only up to Volume 5, despite starting the collection in 2009. However, Volumes 1 and 2 are the only ones you really need to get a bead on Ki-Gor and Helene's character, and you could even just do Volume 1 and still be fine. Much like Ravenwood, Ki-Gor and Helene also appeared in some Moonstone stories. 2 specifically, a story in the collection Of Monsters of Men, and an issue in the comic Guns of the Black Bat. Of Monsters and Men was a story collection showing various pulp heroes fighting monsters, and Ki-Gor and Helene fight some beastmen in this tale. Their appearance in Guns of the Black Bat involves them saving Domino Lady and the Phantom Detective from cannibals. Like the one Ravenwood story, I have no clue if these stories will be referenced in Paladins, but I wanted to mention them just in case anybody wanted to check them out. You can also check out Airship 27's Jungle Stories series, which features several new Ki-Gor tales. The last character we'll be talking about is Nela Qui. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Nela Qui is the bodyguard and assistant to William Benedict, who stalks the night as the vigilante Judgment. She was a nurse in China who helped nurse Benedict back to health after he fought a gang of triads, and later devoted her life to serving him. She also was trained in the art of ninjutsu, and thus knows how to fight opponents with her hands and blades despite her small frame. Nela Qui first appeared in the Judgment story collection, a collection of 3 stories featuring Judgment, Domino Lady, and Secret Agent X. She and Judgment were creations of new pulp writer C.J. Henderson, and were one of the last characters he created before his death in 2014. She and Judgment have only appeared 3 more times after that first collection, but always teamed up with the Domino Lady. This is actually the first story where Nela Qui presumably does not appear with Judgment, which I actually don't mind. No offense to the late C.J. Henderson, but Judgment always came off as too similar to the Spider, who was the obvious inspiration for Judgment. However, Nela Qui is a very compelling character who feels far more original and interesting, and has proven to have a good repartee with Ellen Patrick during their meetings. I'm excited to see what she will do in a story where she's flying without Judgment. Nela Qui is featured in 4 stories from Moonstone, the aforementioned Judgment story collection, the May 2022 issue of Double Shot, the June 2022 B issue of Triple Threat, and the May 2023 issue of Double Shot. Out of all of these, I recommend the first Judgment story collection and the Triple Threat issue, as the first introduces Nela Qui, and the second features her most in-depth interaction with the Domino Lady, where they hunt for the missing Judgment. You can find all of these stories on Moonstone's website. So that's all the established characters to talk about for Paladins. As I mentioned earlier, there is a sixth character called the Night Marcher, but she is an original character being introduced within Paladins. Every other character is established in all of the books and story collections I have mentioned, so get to reading them if you haven't already. I am aiming to have my review of Paladins up on Halloween, so you should have time to read these various stories by then. But before you zip off to do the required reading, I wanted to share some news about the Domino Lady, a few podcast updates, and closing shoutouts. Regarding news about the Domino Lady, there really isn't much new information besides what I mentioned in the last episode. However, there is new material with the Phantom Lady, who is one of the comic book descendants of the Domino Lady, who I refer to as daughters of the Domino Lady. A filmmaker by the name of Chris Notarile has released a Phantom Lady short film, and I really want to discuss both it and the Phantom Lady comics soon. I think I will fast-track the Phantom Lady discussion to be in January or February, as I really want to finish talking about the original Domino Lady stories this year before moving on to anything else. So check out the Phantom Lady short film, link in the description, and hopefully we'll talk about that soon. Regarding podcast updates, there's really not much to say at this point. I am keeping to my originally stated plan of finishing the Domino Lady's original 6 stories by the year's end, as well as covering Paladins The Blue Death and Craig McDonald's Xana 07 series. I'm getting a vague idea about what I want to do at the start of 2026, but there's still some planning to do. Given 2026 is the Domino Lady's 90th anniversary, I'm trying to think of an adequate celebration for that milestone. I'm definitely going to try and do something for Pulp Fest next year for the Domino Lady, like maybe a panel discussing her or an article in the Pulpster magazine. Let me know in the comments if you have any ideas for how to celebrate the 90th anniversary. I also wanted to announce that I'll be starting a BookTube channel soon to discuss other books not related to the Domino Lady. I don't know if it will go on for long, but I'm going to try it just to see if I like it and if others like it. I'll now do a few quick closing shoutouts. First, I wanted to shout out the Shadowed Circle, a cultural magazine I work for that examines the pulp character The Shadow. We're getting close to finishing our 8th issue, and we recently re-released the important Shadow reference book, Gangland's Doom, The Shadow of the Pulps, written by Frank Eisgruber Jr. You should definitely subscribe to the magazine and check out our other books if you're a Shadow fan. Our website and social media pages will be in the description. I also wanted to shout out 2 publications that are featuring advertisements for us in their pages. The first is the Doc Talos magazine, which focuses on a Doc Savage pastiche with a more sensual take on the Savage mythos. You should definitely check them out if you'd like to see a more adult-oriented Doc Savage character, or if you want to see pulp with a more explicitly erotic tone. Basically, think Philip Jose Farmer and you've got an idea of what to expect. The second publication is the science fiction fantasy magazine Cersova, who featured an ad of ours in their fall issue released in mid-September. I've been reading them for several years now, both their magazine and their other book publications, and they're a wonderful sci-fi fantasy publisher that harken back to pulp-style writing. They are also currently doing a Kickstarter for their Wild Stars series, a space opera that spans thousands of years and many different characters. It's very ambitious, but very enjoyable too. Check out the Kickstarter for Wild Stars in the description below. I will also post links to both Doc Talos and Cersova's websites and social media in the description. That is all I have for now, so it's time to sign off. Be sure to check out the stories recommended in this episode if you haven't read them. Thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned for the next episode, and good night to all you suitors of the Domino Lady.